2061, Odyssey 3 by Arthur C. Clarke. Book 5, Chapter 38. Icebergs of Space. Now that they had so much unexpected time on their hands, Captain Smith had finally agreed to give Victor Willis the long-delayed interview that was part of his contract. Victor, himself, had kept putting it off, owing to what Mihailovich persisted in calling his amputation, as it would be many months before he could regenerate his public image. He had finally decided to do the interview off camera. The studio on Earth could fake him in later with library shots. They had been sitting in the captain's still only partly furnished cabin, enjoying one of the excellent wines that apparently made up much of Victor's baggage allowance. As Universe would cut its drive and start coasting within the next few hours, this would be the last opportunity for several days. Weightless wine, Victor maintained, was an abomination. He refused to put any of his precious vintages into plastic squeeze bulbs. This is Victor Willis aboard the spaceship Universe at 1830 on Friday, 15 July 2061. Though we're not yet at the midpoint of our journey, we're already far beyond the orbit of Mars and have almost reached our maximum velocity, which is, Captain, 1,050 kilometers a second, more than 1,000 kilometers a second, almost 4 million kilometers an hour. Victor Willis's surprise sounded perfectly genuine. No one would have guessed that he knew the orbital parameters almost as well as did the captain. But one of his strengths was his ability to put himself in the place of his viewers, and not only to anticipate their questions, but to arouse their interest. That's right, the captain answered with quite quiet pride. We are traveling twice as fast as any human beings since the beginning of time. That should have been one of my lines, thought Victor. He did not like his subject to get ahead of him, but good professional that he was, he quickly adapted. He paused as if to consult his famous little memo pad with its sharply directional screen, whose display only he could see. Every 12 seconds, we're traveling the diameter of Earth. Yet it will take us another 10 days to reach Lucifer. That gives some idea of the scale of the solar system. Now, Captain, this is a delicate subject, but I've had a lot of questions about it during the last week. Oh no, groaned Smith. Not the zero-gravity toilets again. At this very moment, we are passing right through the heart of the asteroid belt. I wish it was the toilets, thought Smith. And though no spaceship has ever been seriously damaged by a collision, aren't we taking quite a risk? After all, there are literally millions of bodies, down to the size of beach balls, orbiting in this section of space, and only a few thousand have been charted. More than a few, over 10,000. But there are millions we don't know about. That's true, but it wouldn't help us much if we did. What do you mean? There's nothing we can do about them. Why not? Captain Smith paused for careful thought. Willis was right. This was indeed a delicate subject. Head office would rap his knuckles smartly if he said anything to discourage potential customers. First of all, space is so enormous that even here, as you said, right in the heart of the asteroid belt, the chance of collision is infinitesimal. We've been hoping to show you an asteroid. The best we can do is Hanuman, a miserable 300 meters across, but the nearest we get to it is a quarter million kilometers. But Hanuman is gigantic compared to all the unknown debris that's floating round out here. Aren't you worried about that? About as worried as you are at being struck by lightning on Earth. As a matter of fact, I once had a narrow escape on Pikes Peak in Colorado. The flash and the bang were simultaneous. But you admit that the danger does exist, and aren't we increasing the risk by the enormous speed we're traveling? Willis, of course, knew the answer perfectly well. Once again, he was putting himself in the place of his legions of unknown listeners on the planet that was getting 1,000 kilometers farther away with every passing second. "It's hard to explain without mathematics," said the captain. How many times he had used that phrase, even when it wasn't true. But there's no simple relationship between speed and risk. To hit anything at spacecraft velocities would be catastrophic. If you're standing next to an atomic bomb when it goes off, it makes no difference whether it's in the kiloton or megaton class. That was not exactly a reassuring statement, but it was the best he could do. Before Willis could press the point further, he continued hastily, "And let me remind you that any slight extra risk we may be running is in the best of causes. A single hour may save lives." "Yes, I'm sure we all appreciate that." Willis paused, but he thought of adding, "And of course I'm in the same boat," but decided against it. It might sound immodest. Not that modesty had ever been his strong suit, and anyway, he could hardly make a virtue of a necessity. He had very little alternative now, unless he decided to walk home. "All this," he continued, "brings me to another point. Do you know what happened just a century and a half ago on the North Atlantic in 1911? Well, actually 1912. Captain Smith guessed what was coming, refused to cooperate with a pretense of ignorance. "I suppose you mean the Titanic, the Titanic," he said. "Precisely," answered Willis, gamely concealing his disappointment. "I've had at least 20 reminders from people who think they're the one, who think they're the only one who's spotted the parallel." "What parallel?" "The Titanic was running unacceptable risks, merely trying to break a record." He almost added, "And she didn't have enough lifeboats," but luckily checked himself in time when he recalled that the ship's one and only shuttle could carry not more than 5 passengers. If Willis took him up on that, it would involve altogether too many explanations. Well, I grant that the analogy is far-fetched, but there's another striking parallel that everyone points out. Do you happen to know the name of Titanic's first and last captain? I haven't the faintest, began Captain Smith, then his jaw dropped. Precisely, said Victor Willis, with a smile that it would be charitable to call smug. Captain Smith would willingly have strangled all those amateur researchers, but he could hardly blame his parents for bequeathing him the commonest of English names.